And let's go. Um, hey everyone, welcome to my little talk here called Animation Principles in Game Dev. This talk is more on the fun side than like an in-depth sort of thing, but hopefully you will find it informative and learn a few things you didn't before regardless. This talk may include some terminology that's unfamiliar to those with zero animation experience. If anything is confusing, ask in chat and I will get to it at the end of the presentation. I'm trying to get this all within 30 minutes, so the slides will be made available after the talk, and pretty much everything I'm about to say will be in the speaker notes in that presentation. So no worries if you miss out on anything. Quick introduction, my name is Brooke. I am a gameplay programmer at Pet Golem Games and the programming lead of a budding game dev team titled ThreadX Needle. While I mostly do programming, I have a big love for animation, and I try to put some of that in every project I work on. So, in the interest of time, here's a quick animation reel. Oh, audio is going through, not really sure how the setup works. Cool. Thank you. Yeah, that's it. Just a quick run through. Most of the stuff in there was just like game dev stuff and like some earlier like stuff when I was like in the stick figure community. Yeah, let's go ahead and move on. Oh, wait, no, that's not how it works. Ta-da. Okay, so moving on. What are the so-called principles of animation? These 12 different fundamentals were defined in an animation guide written by two of the original lead team of Disney animators that kind of spearheaded the Western animation industry. The qualities that they outline are the backbone for not only hand-drawn animation, but computer and digital animation as well. One critical part of understanding animation is that, like, sort of the goal of these principles is that unless you're going for like quadruple A realism in your game's visual identity, animation is more about being convincing than realistic. It should be able to communicate the message that you're trying to send to your audience rather than, I guess, adhere to real life physics or whatever. Your audience's understanding of the world that is your game depends on many factors, and you can tell them a lot by applying the right principles at the right time. Because of the open-ended nature of these principles, they usually just describe good design practices for motion and media as a whole. So it's not just like characters, but also UI and other such things, your environment, visual effects, so on and so forth. All of that stuff plays a huge role in the visual identity and game feel of your projects. A solid GIF or trailer of your game in motion can be like a huge marketing asset. So adding that appeal is a big deal. Moving on. Oh, what the? Parts of the slide didn't reload. Oh. Rest in peace. Swash and stretch. This is number one. The act of scaling entities in motion and distorting their proportions to add life. The amount of squash and stretch that you put in something tells you information about the entity's mass and properties. making it more convincing as a part of your setting. So, for example, like say a bowling ball probably wouldn't have much squishiness, but depending on the style of your game, many of your characters will. You can see here little Madeline from Celeste going at it in the car. Um, when you are applying this principle, make sure that whatever you are animating has the same volume throughout the motion. It'll look really weird if like suddenly your character gets like a lot bigger or a lot smaller than you're supposed to be, but you can like squish or like stretch them out as long as they kind of maintain the same sort of like mass. Um, a very simple animation trick to like quickly implement this in your projects, even if you don't like doing like any big animation or and stuff. You can do this with just like sprite or object scaling. So at the end of a motion, you want to take the last frame and duplicate it twice. So I'm going to use this little character from Forget Me Not as an example. So you take that last frame, duplicate it twice. The first copy should be slightly stretched kind of vertically and squished horizontally in the scale. And then the one right after that should be the other way around to kind of a lesser degree. And then finally you end with the ending frame that you meant to. And so when you do that, like even though it's like the same sprite you're using, it's just like an easy, quick, and simple way to add a little bounce to anything that you want, really. All right, next up, anticipation, the act of adding preparatory action before committing to another action. So the energy to perform movement doesn't just come from nowhere. Setting up that expectation for your audience also makes an action have more gravity to it. So the amount of anticipation that you put in changes the weight of emotion. Fast responsive actions probably won't have much anticipation, if any, since you want the player to have immediate feedback when they press a button. But for like slower, bigger actions, that anticipation really sells their strength. In game design, this is essentially like telegraphing in a sense. When you add anticipation in UI animation, and the actions the player character performs in actions that enemies or other entities perform. All of these are critical to giving visual cues to your players. So you can see here the classic Falcon Punch, and if you're like looking at the animation, you can see like when he like pulls back his fist, like his whole body is tilted in like this really absurd extreme way. Like if you just take a screenshot of that, it would look really weird, but because they're like doing all that in like a really quick sort of motion, it just adds so much power to that Falcon Punch. So and then with Dark Souls down here, much of From Software's enemy design is reliant on understanding how the enemy moves. So this boss right here might come at you with a massive flaming sword that covers the entire room, but if you study the timing well enough from Death After Death, you can use the visual cue to parry even the mightiest of blows with a dinky little shield. It's just like good old-fashioned telegraphing. These examples on the right are from Forget Me Not. You can see like with the crosshair and the kind of slinky hand on the left side, there's like exclamation marks and like some other movement that sort of like signals like some anticipation, so you give the player some time to be able to move out of the way. And then with this enemy here, when it kind of like jumps in, you can see that like kind of glitches, like twitches around, and you can see that the pose that it's in, the sword is like held over its shoulder. It's like ready to like swing that thing at a moment's notice. It's telling you that this thing is about to bonk you on the head. You gotta run away. So next up, we have staging, the act of guiding your audience's eyes with a number of different techniques. So that involves acting, timing things out sequentially, your camera work, your environment composition. Honestly, there's like a lot of different subjects that are all rabbit holes in and of themselves, but the main thing to keep in mind with this principle is to make sure that when you set up your UI, your gameplay layout, your cutscenes, and so on and so forth, that you're paying attention to where the player is looking in a sensible and ordered manner. And you can even take advantage of this to kind of add subtle elements outside of a player's focus or bring their vision like around the screen and like a certain motion to kind of emphasize certain things. So this example on the top left, Short Hike, the camera work and level design is absolutely phenomenal in this game. In this little GIF in particular, you can see the way the shot is framed to kind of show the trail like bending underneath surrounding the hill, and it's kind of like shaded out by the trees. And then you have like this bright patch with like the trail kind of going up. And because of the way it's framed, you have this little rock in the center, and your player will think, this rock is probably important. I should hit it with a shovel. And the player hits it, gets a coin. The Persona series also has pretty much like, honestly, some of the best examples of UI in game dev as a whole. You can see in this shot in particular how they use these lines that are almost kind of like the black bars in like a movie to make the shot look a lot more dynamic. Because if you remove the UI here, it's just a dude just kind of standing there and the enemies are just standing there. But because of like that sort of diagonal angle, it feels like a lot more actiony. In this GIF from Speakeasy at the bottom right, this is a game jam that I did UI and dialogue programming for. We decided to dim the lighting on the non-speaking character. Really simple little choice that we added here because without the dimming, it was kind of hard to tell who was speaking because they both kind of share the same dialogue bubbles. And even when you add that little pointer at the bottom, like it's still kind of hard to tell who is speaking. So just by dimming out like the characters, you guide the player's eyes left and right, and it's much clearer that the conversation is kind of going back and forth here. Next up, number 4, straight ahead / pose to pose. This principle is more specific to hand-drawn animation. So just some background. When you're like animating by hand, drawing out frame after frame, it may feel more natural to draw each frame one after another. This allows for like fluid, smooth, freehand motion and is a lot of fun to do, but you can see an example, it's kind of difficult to maintain the proportion of your subject. Like whenever you're drawing each new frame, you kind of rely on the last frame as like your point of reference, and it becomes like a game of telephone in that sense. Like it sort of like kind of stretches out as you go. On the other hand, there's pose to pose, which is where you like take your whole motion that you want to put in. You draw out a few key frames that really define that motion, and then you kind of fill in all the frames in between those key frames. And so those key poses kind of help you define and structure the motion, and it maintains that sort of proportionality, but it won't look quite as lively or fluid as straight ahead. So usually with hand-drawn animation, it will involve a mix of these two depending on what you're doing. So with computer animation specifically, if you've ever used the Unity animator, the Godot animator, any other such animator component in an engine or program like Blender or something, congratulations, you've basically done pose-to-pose animation before. You can see right here in the bottom right, like this little animation thing with Unity, and each of those diamonds are like different frames that you would set in motion. This sort of layout is like called a dope sheet because I'm not really sure why it's called that, but it's just like when you see frames like laid out like that. And then with computer animation specifically, especially with like 3D and with like 3D skeleton rig animation or like tweening, you set up these keyframes and then the computer interpolates in between. Like it just calculates the sort of straight ahead part for you, so you don't have to worry about that. But as you can see with like this example from Godot's animator, like sometimes you might also mess around with that by like moving around those easing handles. But yeah, even if you don't really know how to animate or you can't put a lot of animation to your projects, just having a few strong keyframes can add like a ton of value to your game. So embedded in this PowerPoint is a video analysis on the animation of Phoenix Wright by New Frame Plus. Phoenix Wright is like I mean, it's just a visual novel. Like it doesn't really have a lot of animation in it. And this was kind of because the first game came out on the Game Boy Advance, and because of the technical constraints of that console, the first game of the series could only show one character on screen at a time, and for every single action, it's pretty much just around 2 to 5 frames for everything that every character does, more or less. But despite this, like the key poses that they set up are so well defined that like every character is just full of life and personality, and this sort of workaround has become a visual staple for the series as a whole. Wow, I'm behind on time. Follow through and overlapping action. There's a few different terms to define with this principle in particular, so I'm just going to kind of quote word for word from the video series that helped me learn the principles. Follow through. Follow through is the behavior of how parts that are attached to a main body continue to move after the main body is stopped. So let's say you're carrying like a loose bag on your shoulder with like just hanging on like one strap, almost like a pendulum. You're walking somewhere and then you suddenly stop walking. Your bag's just gonna swing ahead of you, right? That's kind of like, that's more or less what follow through is. Overlapping action is the distance slash timing displacement between the main body and its attached parts. So take that same bag from before, think of how far it kind of flops forward when you stop, how quickly it's going, and how long it takes to kind of slow down and come to a stop before it comes back to you. And then drag is the act of delaying those attached parts' movement in relation to the main body. So taking that same bag, if you're going at a really fast pace, that bag is going to kind of trail behind you instead of being like perfectly next to your side because it's being pulled along by the strap sitting on your shoulder. So that's like an example of drag. In game dev, you can think of entities and composite parts when moving them around, and you might keep this principle in mind and like have looser components kind of like lag behind or like swing forward in like your UI and so on and so forth. So these animation examples right here, it's a bit fast on the left side, but you can see the way this character moves. You can see her skirt, her hair, her tail, the little sleeves on her shoulder. They all kind of like move like a little bit more past like the main action. They like swing around and they kind of keep going or drag behind depending on what the character is doing. And then this example on the right here is like a really good example. You can see this character like spins around and his overcoat like comes around at the same time. So you can see like the bottom like really flops out and like the sleeves like flick over to the side as he spins. Yeah, so slow in and slow out is number 6. This principle is also sometimes known as ease in and ease out. So almost all natural motion and movement starts slow, kind of builds up, and then slows back down at the end. Only machines really move at like a perfectly constant set pace. So usually adding some kind of easing to any motion in your projects usually makes it look better. So whatever your engine is, you want to be able to use your twinning functions. So Unity has like the .tween plugin. Godot has like some twinning functions built into the base library. I don't know much about Unreal Engine, but I think there's like this plugin I found from a quick Google search called like Fresh Cooked Twins or whatever. And then you can also just do twinning by yourself with like programming. So for example, one way that I kind of do easing motion in Unity when I'm having to dynamically kind of tween an object towards a moving destination, I would like set up this coroutine where I would lerp the object towards like the halfway point, towards that end destination, and just like do that over and over again and have like a small sort of time delay in between each of those. So it's like yield return, wait for seconds, like 1/24 of a second or something. And then I would use that to be able to have something like kind of track towards like a moving object in a way that I guess typical tweeting functions don't always do well. You can see in this example on the right, like a little test animation I did with like the easing in, easing out. You can see like the kick is really fast and snappy, but if you remove all that, if everything just moves in a straight line, he moves like really awkwardly. It doesn't really feel so much like a kick, so much as he's just kind of going. And then you can see on the left, there's like, I guess an example of like different kinds of easing and like the easing functions that you might use. Easings.net is like this website that's like a quick sort of cheat sheet telling you what these easing functions actually mean. I use this website a lot because I keep forgetting which side is ease in and which is ease out. Anyways, moving on. Arcs. Generally, motion that travels in an arc looks more natural instead of mechanical. Again, only machines kind of move in perfectly straight lines in space. So appendages will usually move around the joints that they are attached to. As you can see from this goofy example from Dead Cells in the top right, they got like this cool little animation pipeline going here where they animate something in 3D and then kind of pixelify it into like 2D. But you can see like the way that the elbows kind of move around the joints, the way that the legs kind of like circle around a little bit. Um, yeah, those are like examples of like arcs in like basic character animation. And everything else on this slide is just a bunch of examples of like really satisfying arcs. Spinning things and works really well with attacking motions in particular. I mean, honestly, just look at those motion trails. The more you spin a weapon or tool, the cooler it looks. Trust me. All right. Secondary action. This is often conflated with follow-up slash overlapping action, but it is not the same thing. Follow-up refers to how secondary parts kind of trail behind or uh, flop ahead of like a core motion. And then secondary action, on the other hand, refers to additional smaller motions, animations, and other such elements that kind of supplement the main animation and either enhance it or like add a different quality to it. Um, so these examples right here, I hope I'm understanding this principle correctly because maybe some of these examples might be more peel than secondary action. But this slide's right here. I realized it's only like 10 minutes before this presentation, so I'm going to keep going. Bridget's walk animation. Another example from Guilty Gear. This is just like how she walks forward in the game, but like the way that she kind of swings her left hand with like her pointer finger out back and forth, the way she bobs her head, the way that her legs kind of like hold a pose for a little bit, like just before taking each step. It's like she's kind of walking to her own beat, and it's like it really adds like a lot of character. It tells you like, oh, this character is really cute, and she goes by her own rhythm. So her jacket and her handcuff belt here are examples of follow through. You can kind of see how they like drag behind, but all the other motions are like deliberate and added on top of like the basic motion of walking, and it just turns into this like it turns a basic walk into like this jaunty little strut that oozes charm and cuteness. So this example on the right here in Hi-Fi Rush, rest in peace Tango Gameworks, look at Chai and 808's facial expressions, the way they kind of tilt their heads a little when they do this fist bump, the little finger wiggle after they finish the fist bump. It's just kind of like adding that extra mile, like those extra little actions to like, and taking like this simple fist bump and adding this extra little quality that tells you, oh, these characters are bros. And then in the middle here, this is like a slightly outdated sample UI animation I made completely in Unity for showing a prop in a dialogue system. So you can see like there's like kind of these faint bubbles in the back on the white background. There's like these little wheels that kind of spin in the back. So a lot of these principles, again, they're like just as applicable to like UI as they are to characters. And when applying this principle, you want to make sure secondary action only supports or supplements the main action in some way. It shouldn't overwhelm the main action's motion or what it's trying to convey at its core. All right, moving on. Timing, this principle refers to, well, timing. The amount of space between each key pose or frame can change a lot about an animation. So on this example on the left, everyone's seen Spider-Verse, so you can see like the Spider-Verse suit that they put in Insomniac Spider-Man. They have it animating on twos, and it gives it like this really unique comic book look. So animating on twos, basically, typical hand-drawn animation is usually done at a rate of, displayed at a rate of 24 frames per second. So animating on ones means like putting a new frame on each and every one of those available frames within a second. So you can stuff like 24 different frames into a single second. And while this looks really smooth, it's not usually feasible to hand animate everything on ones because, oh my god, that is so much drawing. You are going to get carpal tunnel so fast. So that's why we do like animation on twos and threes. So animation on twos means drawing a new frame every other frame. So you only have like 12 drawings in any given second. And this is great for slower and more subtle actions. And you can see they use it to create the comic book effect in Spider-Man. In Japanese animation pipelines for like anime and such, they will actually animate on threes for basic motions because like their character designs tend to be like a lot more complex. One thing to keep in mind when kind of like messing with like animating on ones and twos and stuff, once you start dropping below around like 16 frames a second, that's kind of when the human eye starts to distinguish each frame as like a picture rather than like a whole smooth moving entity. Um, this is kind of related to easing, but it shouldn't be like mixed up with it. So for example, when you're doing tweening in rig animation, it's like the distance between your keyframes that you set up rather than like the easing stuff that you apply on the interpolation that the computer calculates. So just like changing the distance between like those keyframes can really make a big difference in the animation quality and what you're trying to convey. So coming back to like that stick figure kick, you can see like when the actual kick happens, it's actually just like one frame of motion basically, and then it like stops at like the very end of that kick and adds like a little blur. It's like changing up that timing can add like some impact to it. For action games in particular, hit stop is a great example of this sort of thing. So you can see like in this fighting game example on the top right, every time the character on the left hits the one on the right, like they both kind of pause for a second. And that adds like this little bit of feedback that your players aren't really going to see very often, but they'll feel like that little pause, that little extra oomph that you add to every single hit. So that's one way to apply timing in game development. Exaggeration. This one's a really fun one. It's really just like when you're setting up key poses and extreme in-betweens, like you really want to push the limits of your poses, like make your actions more convincing. Leave the player no room to misinterpret what a character or an entity is doing, and just like turn the dial up to 11. So extreme smear frames are an example of how to implement this in both 2D and 3D animation. So between poses, like having these smeary messes appear for just a moment can like is like in hand-drawn animation, it's kind of a way to like cheat out frames in between like those 24 frames that you are allotted when you're drawing. So you can see like in this example at the top right, like there's like these weird, massive, blurry messes that are frames in like this animation in the middle. And despite that, like because it's like so fast, it makes the character look really quick and makes them like kind of squash and stretch in a way that's dynamic and it's interesting. Your players aren't really going to see these frames, but they will absolutely feel them. Um, so that's like kind of classic smearing. And then there's another way to do smearing that's kind of like called duplicate smearing. So you can see in this example from Indivisible, also kind of in the middle, like this dude doesn't actually have 4 arms. It's just like he's swinging his right arm all the way around in a circle. And for a split second, they show 3 different arms to kind of like cheat out this motion and make it like come out really fast. If anything in your game feels boring, just add some spice to it. So like with Guilty Gear Strive, yet again, you can see LFL here is like trying to do a command grab, and when she misses like grabbing her opponent, like she flops over completely, like 180 in like this Looney Tunes looking pose. It's like she absolutely did not have to do that, but it tells you a lot about like kind of how goofy her character is. There's also like this exaggerated example from Honkai Star Rail. Like you barely actually see this character like moving in between the pose to pose, but the poses are so extreme and they add like all these incredible visual effects and like really push the camera angle that like you can't help but just be like in awe at like what the heck is even going on. And then there's like this classic smearing example in the bottom right corner. Cassidy like going at it with that dodge roll of his. You can see like the way his face just like stretches for a split second. It looks super weird, but when it's in motion, it looks way better. All right, parts of the slide didn't load. Come on. All right, show anyways. I was trying to add in like some stuff at the end, and I guess it didn't make it in, but solid drawing. This refers to ensuring that anything you draw feels like it occupies like 3D space. Mastering this in art and animation makes for a more convincing result and adds depth. So for 2D drawings and entities in particular, you should be able to rotate them like towards and away from the camera convincingly without having them look flat. So you can see like in this example of this concept art of Ajna from Indivisible, they have like this 3/4 layout and then like a front, side, and back profile, which really helps guide like animations of this character. And then like they have like these head profiles that show kind of how her head should be looking as it like tilts like from a front facing angle to like a side or looking up and down, so on and so forth. The closest game dev thing I can connect this principle to that isn't like strictly art is sprite layering in 2D dev. And I had 3 examples. Now I have 2 because it won't load for some reason. But let's go with these 2 examples. Parallaxing. Almost every like developer who's worked with like 2D dev knows what parallaxing is. It's just like making the background kind of move slower. So things that are further in the back will move slower than things that move in the front. So this example from Undertale is like a really simple example. Because this castle like moves really slow, it has the feeling of like being really far away in the background. Another neat way to create dimension with 2D assets is pixel stacking. So if you draw like kind of cross sections of a 3D object and then you layer those cross sections like slightly above one another so that they're kind of vertically close to one another, you can create like this sort of fake 3D effect. So like this rotating lighthouse, it's nothing about this is 3D. It's all like 2D sprites that are just like slightly positioned vertically above one another and just like rotated in a way that makes it seem like really 3D. Yeah, let's move on. Appeal. Last principle. This refers to how compelling a character or object looks. This principle more intersects with like character design, but it's also like really important with animation. It's just like I guess in animation it would just be like adding kind of like exaggeration or secondary motion. Kind of it ties in a little bit with that, where you just like take like the character or something that you're animating, and you think about like how they would do something like in a way that fits their personality, and sort of adjust the animation to kind of fit that. But these are mostly examples of like character design. So you want to have like strong shapes and silhouettes to have your character stand out regardless of dimensions. So for example, with fighting games, a lot of characters in fighting games will have their hands and feet be bigger than what is like typical, so that like it's a clear sort of silhouette when they're like punching or kicking. So in this example from Indivisible, there's this one character who has like this massive gauntlet on one hand, and you can see like this makes her silhouette stand out like in a really big way. With 2D characters in particular, if you want to set them up for animation, you want to simplify the details and the shading. So, for example, these 2 characters designed by Captain Turnip, who is the art lead of ThreadX Needle, their full designs are a lot more detailed and complex than what's pictured here, but he essentially makes them more animation ready by removing like unnecessary details, breaking the hair and clothing down into more simpler, distinct shapes, and changing the proportions to kind of fit the visual scale of the game that we were kind of going with, which is like kind of more 2D side-scrolling-esque. I'm sure I could go into way more detail on their designs than I can, but that's kind of the gist of it with like, I guess 2D character design and such. With 3D characters in particular, obviously you can get away with more detail on your character models, but just make sure that the model looks good from every side that the player will see them from, and that you don't have like any major clipping issues with how the character moves. I'm not as knowledgeable with, I guess, designing models and such for animation, but you can see in this example from Super Mario Wonder, the animators take advantage of the fact that you're always kind of looking from a side-scrolling perspective. So they really mess with the 3D model in this case. So you see in like this like still frame that was like extracted by Animation Hustle, Mario's pose when he runs looks really weird from the front. Like his head is a little bit off center, his mustache is and eyes and stuff are all off center. His mouth is completely pulled to one side. He's got like extra feet showing up. But because you're only seeing it from one side, they kind of apply like 2D animation principles to 3D, and they kind of make these extra elements like the feet appear and disappear with different motions, and they like tilt everything over so that it's like even though it's 3D, like it still looks like really beautifully well done, like as if they almost like hand animated it by hand themselves. Um, yeah, so that is all the principles. Hopefully I have kept everything within, that was about like 35, 36 minutes. So if you want to explore more into animation and game dev related animation, I gathered some resources here in the PowerPoint to take a look at. The presentation will of course be available, so pretty much a lot of these where there's like videos and such, I added like hyperlinks directly into the PowerPoint so that you can get access to them. Shout out in particular to Alan Becker's video series on the 12 principles you can see here on the top left for making it super easy to understand and kind of refresh my memory on the subject. And my copy of the Animator Survival Kit is buried under a lot of books right now, and I didn't really want to have to go digging for it just to review on the 12 principles again. So, yeah. Questions, comments, concerns, corrections, complaints? I will be, yes, accepting them. Okay. How easy do you think it is to go from doing 2D to learning 3D animation and vice versa? So, with 2D animation, do you mean like hand drawn or like rigging or skeletal kind of animation? Okay, hand drawn animation. So, obviously, that's like very different from kind of 3D animation. It's like you're fundamentally like working in a different way, but the general principles that you learn by doing one or the other are like really good for transferring from one to the other. I don't really know how to describe it exactly, even though I've like done like hand drawn and like a little bit of 3D, but it's kind of like because with like 3D, you're just like setting up like those key poses and letting the computer interpolate in between. If you've done like hand drawn animation before, you'll kind of understand how you're supposed to like make things ease in between those key poses and like how to set up like the timing between those key poses. So even though it's like a completely different way of like doing animation that you will have to like kind of like learn sort of from the ground up, those principles that you learn from 2D are actually really going to help a lot with learning 3D. So with me, like I started doing stick figure animation in like middle school. So I started with like this basic hand drawn animation with like these basic little stick figures, and then a lot later down the line, I picked up After Effects. So After Effects has like a lot of twinning functions for moving things around in 2D, and that kind of I used like my hand drawn animation principle, like what I learned from hand drawn animation, to kind of tell me how something is supposed to look when I was like learning twinning, and then I kind of picked up like twinning principles from and easing stuff from there, and then after that, like 3D is just like kind of just adding a third dimension to that sort of like motion graphic twinning. Um, where do I learn how to draw? I wish I could tell you because I don't feel like I'm really all that good at drawing myself. You don't have to be a good artist to actually animate. Like 3D animators in particular, a lot of them don't. A lot of them like okay, not a lot of them don't know how to draw, but it's like there's a surprising number of 3D animators who can get away with like not having like strong hand drawing principles and still be able to do their jobs like really well if they're able to understand the general concepts. Of course, like knowing how to draw like really helps a lot, and those are definitely skills you want to practice. But yeah, I to learn how to draw, honestly, just keep drawing. I think if you really want to learn in a structured way, there's drawlabox.com. but like learning drawing, there's sort of like three different ways of learning it, at least from what I've heard like described by other people. One is just like kind of drawing whatever you want and just like getting used to it, and then like kind of building up, like experimenting with like different ideas that you might want to do, and that kind of like pushes. It gets you used to drawing because and sort of helps you like experiment and like think about like different kind of things you can do. One thing you can do is like more structured drawing. So like doing a lot of like life study, life sketches and such. That's like really good for building up your fundamentals, and you really need like those strong fundamentals to pick up your drawing ability. So doing like studies like that, figure drawing in like real life, or like drawing from models and such, like on physical media, is like a really good way to like quickly improve. That's why you always see like those examples in like art school. And then you can also draw. You can also like kind of find like your favorite artists and like take a look at their styles and see if you can like try and emulate them. Like kind of think about why they draw certain things the way that they do, and you can kind of like understand someone's style in that sense. Because if you just like kind of like copy them one for one ish, you won't be able to understand quite as well their style. But it's about like improving your like observation skills, and kind of all those like three different ways of like learning kind of like really tie and build up on one another. Yeah, at least that's what I've heard. Um, Animation principle tier list. I will need to come up with that one later, but I would definitely say exaggeration is up there at the top for me. Um, but yeah, let's see. Can animate real time VFX without being able to draw? Absolutely. After Effects. There's like a bunch of different programs like that. Blender, After Effects. You can learn to program like shaders to do like real time VFX and such. So even if you're like a pure programmer, like you can kind of like get into like tech art and like make like some really cool special effects. I've really wanted to actually pick up shaders, but of course like time is always real tight and such. Um, let's see. Scrolling through the chat. I always laugh when I tell people I do game art, and their first response is, "Oh wow, I can't draw at all." Like same. Oh my god, same for real. I have people who say I can draw. I don't feel like I can draw. It's really just like kind of. Um, there's always going to be like that big element of imposter syndrome, and that's kind of part of growing as an artist. Um, because like you'll like come up with like these great ideas in your head, and then when you try and draw it, like if you don't have like a lot of years of practice, it's not going to live up to like kind of what you had in mind. And definitely this is something that kind of like paralyzed me from like drawing a lot, but it's kind of like something you have to kind of get over um, by just drawing more and more, getting used to drawing, getting used to like bad drawing, because good drawing is built on mountains of bad art. Um, and then as you draw more, as you do like life studies, as you like study other people's styles and experiment, you build up your observation skills, and as your observation skills improve, so does your drawing. So what programs do I usually use for animation? For me in particular, with hand drawn animation, I use Clip Studio Paint. I think I got like an email saying that the EX version with like the animation timeline and stuff is on sale for like $79 or something. Usually it only goes on like 100 on sales, but it's kind of weird because it's only like the version 1.0 and it's like a CD. But anyways, Clip Studio Paint, I think it's like a really great program for like raster drawing that has like good animation tools and a lot of like interesting supplemental tools along with it. There's for free programs, there's Krita, which I haven't used it a bunch. I never really got into it far enough to understand it well, but it has an animation pipeline, and I know a few animators that are really well known that get a lot of good use out of it. So with motion tweening, I use After Effects. and like motion graphics and such. So like for VFX with like Speakeasy and such, um, I made like those little musical note pops using After Effects completely. Sometimes I just do animation completely in like the Unity engine. So like that squash and stretch trick that I talked about, and like being able to like tween using a coroutine and stuff. If you're really clever with your programming, you can just do animation through that. And then for 3D, I haven't done very much 3D at all. I've just like played around with Blender a little bit, but Blender is really good. It's rapidly being picked up as like an industry standard, and there's a lot of cool tools in it. There's even like 2D animation in Blender through like the grease pencil. So you can actually do 2D animation through that. I haven't explored it enough, so it feels like I guess the brush options are a bit limited there, but it's really interesting because when you draw in 2D, it's still kind of rendered in 3D. So you can like take that 2D drawing and kind of like mess around with it or mess with like camera angles and stuff. And it's really interesting. Um, yeah, I feel. Oh, pixel animation. Ace Sprite is a really good program for that. I think it's like $20 or something for like a one-time purchase, and then even if you can't afford that much, like you can actually compile it yourself, and if you do that, it's free because they like share the source code and stuff, and there's like guides online to walk you step by step through compiling it. Um, there's also like Adobe Animate, which is definitely a weird one. I can probably dive into the history of that, but how its origins from Flash. But I'm not going to get into that. But it's kind of like a vector animation program. It's kind of interesting that in that it has like a scripting language that lets you like do some other stuff with it, like stuff that you would usually see in Flash games. But it's the Adobe suite, so obviously it's going to be really hard to access. Um, I think that's everything that comes off the top of my head. Oh, and then there's Spine. That's a 2D animation program for like skeleton and rigging animation. It's like 69 for like the base version, and then like an absurd price like 369 for like the full version. But there's like a trial you can test out, and you can do like some really cool things with skeleton animation that kind of resemble like the stuff you would see in like live 2D models and such. Um, let's see, mess around with grease pencil. Oh, is Ace Sprite 15? I actually haven't like been keeping too much of a track. It might be 15. I haven't looked at it in a while. Yeah, thank you for linking Ace Sprite and Spine. Um, it is 20. Rest in peace. Um, yeah, that's fine. I did want to kind of explore that in this game jam that I'm taking part in because I kind of want to emulate the animation style that they do in Rhythm Heaven, and that one they use like a lot of tweening and like a little bit of kind of skeleton animation and like some clever use of like keyframes. If it takes me too long to pick up Spine, I might just like try and do it all in After Effects. But yeah. Um, I just know a lot of programming and using game engines and such. I just think at art and tend to use the sprite resource a lot bit more than I should. Relatable, honestly. Like a lot of projects I've worked on, like the artistic direction was absolutely carried by my partner in crime, Peter. Um, but it's just like more time that you put into it, like the better that you get at it, and it's I guess from like a really beginner perspective, I'll like start by like working on like exercises that improve your observation ability, because the more you kind of improve that and hone that ability, the better your drawing gets. Um, I think that's about everything. No more questions from the audience. It is like I have been taking up almost an hour of time, and there is like a game dev meetup that is supposed to happen after this presentation. So I think we can wrap things
Speaking
up.
of, Speaking of, we can probably sit down in general after this. And Brooke, if you have like time after this, we people can ask you questions there. We can set up a topic for that.
Oh yeah, of course.
All right.
Let me go ahead and kill the recording.